76% of people at the end of their life have regret, not because of what they said, not because of what they did, but because of what they didn't do.
Mahlum isn't your typical entrepreneur. She's a woman who turned her passion for running into a lifeline for those experiencing homelessness, founding Back on My Feet, a nonprofit that proves running can rebuild lives.
If I'm going to be coaching 20 classes a week, I am telling my team that my value to this company is worth $60 an hour. That can't be the job of a CEO.
In 2013, she took on a whole new challenge, revolutionizing fitness with Solidcore, a boutique workout brand that became one of the fastest growing fitness companies in the US.
During my 20s, I was just desperate to figure out how I become special. Like, how do I find fulfillment? How do I find purpose? So that's when I ended up starting this nonprofit for the homeless. Americans love underdog stories. We love rooting for the guy that we think doesn't have a chance. And so I started to realize all of these things in this story and figure out a way to capitalize on all of them to raise money for the organization. If you're a founder, every 6 months, you have to be looking at how you're spending your time. If it's the same as it was 6 months ago, you're in trouble from a scaling perspective. Can't have personal growth without endings. Everybody just thinks, once I'm confident, then I'll do it. Only way you'll ever get confident is by doing.
By the time she exited in 2023, she'd built a fitness empire with over 100 locations and sold her shares for an impressive $88 million. This is Mahlum, and this is her story.
Welcome to Success Story. I'm your host, Scott Clary. The Success Story podcast is part of the HubSpot podcast network. They have great podcasts, but they also have great tools for entrepreneurs. That's why I've worked with them for over 3 years now. I want you to picture this for a second. You're at a party and someone asks you what you do as a marketer. And this is a lesson for marketers and even people that don't classify as marketers, because at the end of the day, everybody has to figure out how to talk about the product to grow their business. Whether or not you're formally trained or you're a solopreneur, you have to market. Now, marketers have a tough job because it's really hard to describe what a marketer is. Because if you think about what a day in the life of a marketer is, you have to generate leads, you have to score them, you have to contact them, you have to create content, you have to gather data, and tomorrow, you have to do it all over again, and then you have to wonder if it's even working. Marketers are spread way too thin. Anybody that does marketing is spread way too thin. Now, HubSpot has a collection of AI tools called Breeze to help marketers. They have features like Content Remix, where you turn one piece of content into all these different assets. You can also pinpoint the best products with predictive lead scoring, so you can know who's actually going to buy your product or service. You can level up your campaigns with KPIs and analytics. So your day-to-day as a marketer becomes less busy work and more driving revenue through the roof. So remember, everybody at the end of the day has to be a marketer. And more importantly, you'll have a way easier time describing what you do at parties. If you want help marketing your product or service, if you want to grow your business, visit HubSpot.com/marketers to learn more. And
Hi.
how's it going?
Okay, it's going great.
I'm excited we finally got to do this.
Me too. Months in the making.
Months in the making. And I mean, this has been a huge journey even for the show, because I've been trying to get the studio set up and everything. So I actually really appreciate your patience.
My pleasure.
I want people to get to know a little bit about you. Obviously, if they Google you, they're going to see Solidcore. They're going to see a great company that you built. That a lot of people know that company very well. But let's back up just a tiny bit. Very briefly, talk to me about a major inflection point, a major moment when you were growing up that sort of put you on the path to where you are today, something that sort of shaped who you are.
I think what shaped me the most is my parents' relationship, like everybody else, and I thought my parents had a decent relationship and I had my life figured out pretty early. It's funny. I actually thought I had my whole life figured out by the time I was 12 years old. I had this box underneath my bed, and I put things in it about what my life was going to look like when I got big. So there was this tall, dark, handsome guy who was going to be my husband, this big white house with white picket fence, 2 kids, all of these things. And frankly, up until 12 years old, life was pretty easy. I was good at sports. School was easy and whatever. So I kind of thought this life thing was going to be figured out. And then when I was 16, my dad came home from work early and asked if me and my younger brother and her sister could leave for a bit so we could talk to our mom. And we all knew something was wrong. That wasn't normal. We never had to leave the house. And that was the day my dad told my mom that he had a pretty severe gambling problem. And as most addictions do, they don't surface until there's a crisis. And my dad owed a lot of people a lot of money, and it was time to pay. It was like out of a mafia movie. It was what?
This is serious.
It was serious, and my mom's a public school teacher. My dad really never got a knack for working, so we didn't have a ton of money. Like, my mom had to really be diligent about saving and putting money away for us to take a vacation every 3 years for our college education. So when my dad violated all of that, it's like she worked years to try to set us up. That was it for her. My dad struggled with drugs and alcohol when I was really young. I've never seen him drink or do drugs, but my mom did. And so when the money thing happened, it was like, that's it, I'm done. She asked my dad to leave that day. And as a kid who never really saw her parents have any issues or didn't have any warning that her family unit was about to be torn apart, I was really pissed. I was like really angry at my mom for taking my dad away. And I didn't get addiction. I just thought, why don't you quit gambling and we can go back to being a family? So those teenage years were tough, but also full of resilience for me. And I remember feeling like, I'm not going to be a statistic. I'm going to go have an incredible life. And weirdly, Scott, like ever since I can remember, I did always tell myself that I'm going to be somebody someday, that like I'm capable of big things, helping people, making impact, being successful. Like I really felt that way about myself since a kid. And after this happened with my parents, I also remember telling myself and my mom that like at some point I'm going to be a millionaire. Like money is not going to ruin my life, my relationship. Like I'm just going to have enough of it where it doesn't ever cause me problems.
That's a tough childhood to go through. But I mean, I think that it's not like you went through rock bottom as a kid. You still had a loving family, but I mean, you still had a lot of difficult times. And I think that almost like when you go through those very difficult, tumultuous times, or when money's an issue, or it sets you up with this really powerful North Star that you actually end up chasing your whole life, because you just don't want to ever have to deal with that you saw in your own family. And as you sort of like went through your career and your life, obviously you have this sort of fire to be successful, so the money's never an issue. How does that actually manifest in what you do as you start to go out into the world, you start to work, start to figure out what you want to do for a living?
Yeah, it was interesting because even more so than money, I wanted to feel special. I was like the sibling growing up where I outworked and outperformed my brother and sister. Like I was varsity sports, pretty much straight A's. And I'm like, how come my parents don't love me more than they love my brother and sister? You sort of get like, I'm achieving more, like I should get more praise. My parents just never did that. And so again, weirdly enough, you sometimes don't know where all these things come from, but I was like, oh, I'm going to go get that in the outside world. So I was sort of chasing this admiration, adoration from strangers, outside people to give me validation that I was special. Like when we're young, I think a lot of people misinterpret that sort of public affection and affinity for love. And that's what I was chasing because I really didn't know the difference back then. And so during my 20s, I was just desperate to figure out how I become special. Like, how do I find fulfillment? How do I find purpose? How do I make my life meaningful? And so that's when I ended up starting this nonprofit for the homeless. These guys were outside of a shelter and I was running by them and realized like, why don't I just run with them? Ended up building this really big nonprofit that scaled across the country that used running as a vehicle to help people change the way that they saw themselves. And realizing that the only reason I was actually attracted and interested in these guys was because they reminded me of my dad, who more than likely would have ended up in a homeless shelter if it wasn't for marrying my mom and having that support system there. And so realizing you can take your pain, right? Your pain and your fuel of, I never figured out a way to help my dad. I could never understand addiction back then, but running is what got me through that. And if I can then use running to help these guys who are dealing with addiction, your life starts to make a little bit of sense. And I kind of felt like my pain was now turned into purpose. And so I did that, for 6.5 years. And
like, did you still feel, now you're serving this population, this group of people that everyone else has forgotten about? Yeah. Did you feel like that was actually sort of scratching that itch of you being special, you having purpose, you receiving like I don't know, love from the universe or whatever it is?
It did. Well, one, I got a lot of attention from doing that on media, public scale. Like I was a CNN hero. I was NBC's Person of the Week, so I was getting a lot of accolades for this thing, and it just everything about it worked because I felt like I was the perfect person to do it because of my dad's addiction issues and my love of running. And I didn't know that I had a knack for business or scaling or systems or process. Like I didn't really know that then, but turned out like I was pretty decent at that and put those things in place to be able to scale that thing across the country. So I was hitting all of these buckets that were really filling me up. I got to help people. I felt like I was healing myself, turning my pain into something positive. I was getting to build something, which I really, really turned out I enjoyed, like taking something from an idea and turning it into an actual real life thing and then making it bigger was really, really exciting to me to figure out how to do that. So I was super happy there for 6.5 years.
Looking back, do you feel like that motivation of because everybody has different motivations for why they build things or why they take on these huge challenges. It's not easy. So you need something outside of, I do believe you need something outside of just money to make this stuff work. But you say, of course, but you know that many people do not.
Yeah, but no, I actually don't. I think money follows, Scott. I think the most successful people, like I remember I had this massive job opportunity at Comcast the day I was supposed to go in and like start my job, and I had just started back on my feet. And I remember like it was a 6-figure job, like as a 27-year-old 20 years ago, like that was a lot of money, stock options at Comcast, like it was a big deal. And I remember having to take a bunch of these politicians and people out to a baseball game and like converse and talk with them. And I'm like, I'm so bored. Like I can't do this. Right. So back on my feet, I loved hanging out with those guys. I loved running with them. I loved seeing them step into their potential. And I always felt like my dad never got that shot. He had 2 alcoholic parents. They still don't know if my dad's dad ended up committing suicide or accidentally shooting himself. Like he had a really, really horrible upbringing. And I very well know that when people don't have the circumstances as kids and as children to be influenced in the right way, it wasn't surprising to me that these guys ended up in homeless shelters, right? They didn't have the support systems. You're growing up in poverty. You're growing up in your surroundings that don't present a lot of options. And so the fact that like I could help these guys change their identity into somebody who saw themselves as homeless and an addict, into somebody who gets to be a runner, a teammate, disciplined, hardworking, and that it taught me the power of belief systems. Because don't forget, when I was young, I told myself I'm going to be somebody. And if I told myself I'm not going to be somebody, my parents are divorced, blah, 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 I'll lean into that narrative. That's how your life goes. And it just reinforced to me the power of what can change for you when you start to believe something different about who you are and what you're capable of. And you never get tired of watching someone step into that potential. Like it was exhilarating to see these guys go from never running a mile to running a marathon to getting a job at Marriott to moving out into their own place. It was like change is possible in the right environment. And that was really cool for me.
You know, it's interesting though, because what you just said was when you went into it, you wanted to feel like special yourself.
Yeah.
But somewhere along that journey, your purpose shifted from like me feeling special to the mission is now getting that person to change and to be better. So there was like this shift. And I don't know if you even understand like when that was in that journey, but you stopped caring about yourself and you stopped caring about your own notoriety and fame and whatever that was. And then all of a sudden that energy was put towards someone else's transformation.
Totally. And when you realize, oh my gosh, helping people actually makes you feel so good, right? It doesn't have to be just like, oh, I hate it, but this person's helping. Like it all needs to be harmonious. You mentioned earlier about the podcast. Your podcasts are great when like you're having a good time and I'm having a good time. And Back on My Feet worked when I'm like loving helping and creating an environment for these guys to make change for them, like for themselves. And they wanted to make the change. So we were all like celebrating and moving forward and being healed together. Like it just was so symbiotic.
I love that. But this is the thing that I've noticed about nonprofits. I actually think that you are not the normal nonprofit or it's nonprofit, or I don't think you're the normal nonprofit founder or nonprofit executive, because I see, obviously, look at what you went on to build. But for some reason, nonprofits don't usually operate that efficiently, and they don't usually, they try for change, but they're the people that are attracted to them and work for them. They're not the best operators in the business. And I think that's a huge missed opportunity. And I'm curious why you were able to build this so successfully. And obviously you just have a mind for it and a brain for it. But like, what were the things that you did in this particular company that you see a lot of people lack in the nonprofit space?
Oh man. So a few things. Like I love the saying, play a game that you can win. Right? Like every one of us, Scott, you have certain skill sets and so do I, and we have things that we're not good at and whatever. I was really good at figuring out what am I really good at and how does that serve the mission of this organization? And then you ask the question, well, who's going to care about these guys? Who cares if they're homeless or not? It's a really difficult issue to get people to get behind, right? There's a lot easier nonprofits and causes, babies, kids with cancer, animals. Why would you want to help a bunch of 40 and 50-year-old men who a lot of people think screwed up their own life, right? Like they're living in homeless shelters, get a job, get your life together. And so the way we raised money was, I'm like, I have to find the runners. I need to find people who understand what this sport has done for themselves and knowing how much they respect themselves when they're out there at 6 a.m. running. And I need to find the executives who are runners because they have the money. And so I found inroads. We had this big article in Runner's World. It's still one of my favorite articles ever written about Back on My Feet. And Larry Solomon, who was the COO of Accenture, read that article. He lived in Philly, shot me a note saying, this is really cool, rooting for you. And I'm like, please say we can get coffee, And Larry was my meal ticket to all these executives. I'm like, introduce me to the runners. I need the runners. And then it just snowballed from there. So I built events. I created running events and I created breakfasts, and I would get you out running with our members, which I'm like, if I can just get you to meet these guys, Darren, James, Joe, I mean, so many of them, you're going to fall in love with them. It is the ultimate underdog story. And there's nobody, like, Americans love underdog stories. We love rooting for the guy that we think doesn't have a chance. And so I started to realize all of these things in the story and figure out a way to capitalize on all of them to raise money for the organization.
It's so simple, but so smart. I think a lot of like nonprofits, if you want to give back and you're in that space, like, these are good examples to learn from, because I do think that sometimes people have a hard time scaling those types of organizations and attracting the right talent and finding ways to raise money. So, I mean, you just nailed it. What were some of the things that you actually took and you brought into Solidcore from a nonprofit environment?
Yeah. So the thing about scaling is you look at the ecosystem that works, and then you have to say, how do I replicate the ecosystem? So give you an example with the Solidcore studio and the Back on My Feet running team. So when the chapters were forming with Back on My Feet, when we had one group running, right? And then it's like, okay, how do we go to 2? The logistics start to enter, and it's like, well, let's have everybody meet together. It's like, that's not going to work for very long, because how do we get more homeless shelters to be a part of the program when they're spread across the city? And now we've got to pick people up at 4. Like, it's never going to work. We actually need to replicate the shelter. So we had teams. So we would have, call it 6 teams in Philly. Let's say you wanted to volunteer, Scott. You would get placed on a team and you would go to that homeless shelter in the morning. And then there'd be 5 other teams that would go to other homeless shelters, volunteers, and we would all be running at the same time, not together, right? So like, okay, cool, that can continue to replicate. And then you would take that model into another city and say, okay, we need a local executive director, and we need local staff and local funding.
You're building systems all the time.
Systems, processes. Yeah. So for a Solidcore studio, same thing. What do you need to make a Solidcore studio work? You need a leader of the studio. You need coaches. You need consistency. And so like, great, place the ecosystem. Awesome. Well, what about the next one? The next one. It was easy to do that when in DC, when there was like, everybody was there. And then it was time to go to another city. Well, how are you going to keep the brand consistent? So it was very evident that the training for the coaches had to stay corporate. Like, we would send our people, from corporate down there, get bought into the brand, understand the ethos, everything. And that director of training, I spent a ton of time with. Her name was Jo Gomez. And like, we had to be on the same page about this culture, about how we do things. what's rewarded, why we say people's names in class. And so again, it's this replication of what makes this special, and over and over again.
So everything that you learned to do in the nonprofit world, that was like directly applicable, like building these systems, processes, keeping like understanding what has to be corporate versus decisions that can be made on the ground. I love it.
Well, let me give you another quick example of that because it will help people, Scott. Like for me, if you're a founder, right, every 6 months, you have to be looking at how you're spending your time. And if it's the same as it was 6 months ago, you're in trouble from a scaling perspective. And so when I first started Solidcore, I was coaching all the time, right? Because I had one studio, that made sense. But when I had 5, right, coaching a class was costing me, call it back then, 60, $70 per coach. If I'm going to be coaching 20 classes a week, I am telling my team that my value to this company is worth $60 an hour. That can't be the job of a CEO. So I started to figure out what's the best way for me to make the most financial impact for the business based on my skill sets. And that was negotiation with the landlords, right?
Yeah.
How do I get the best deal on this 10-year lease that I'm going to sign? How do I get tenant improvement dollars? And how do I get rent abatement? Because those were 2 things that were going to affect my cash flow a lot. So I would meet in person with every landlord. I would make you like me. I would get you to root for me. I would explain why I need this rent abatement and ask what's important to you for this deal. And if I couldn't do the deal, I would say, listen, those economics don't work for me. Here's why. But I would build relationships with anybody where the financial impact to the company was massive. That's the best use of my time. And then it would just continue to elevate. So so yes, 1,000%. In hindsight, looking back is 2020, and that makes perfect sense. Now, what was the thing that happened to you in your life that made you realize that you have to step out of like the day to day? What was the story that forced you, or the thing that was breaking, or the shit hitting the fan moment, or the I can't scale anymore, or I'm working 100 hours a week? I think it was that back on my feet when I was continuing to run with all of the groups and still running, and like those runs take place at 5:30 in the morning. And like, I'm trying to be at all the social events and do everything else. And at some point I'm like, I just can't do this all. So I have to figure out what can I replicate? And again, go back to Solidcore. The coaches I can replicate, right? If I'm the only one that can coach a Solidcore class, that's a problem. I can't scale that. I didn't think that was true, right? I knew we could coach coaches and coach trainers, right? But like, what is the thing that Anne Mahlum can do that nobody else can do? And it is, I'm very convincing and I'm a great negotiator. So I'm going to spend my time doing those things. There really was not like a shit hits the fan moment, but there was moments when I was micromanaging, right? When I was like trying to be involved in everything. And then you get feedback from your staff on like how much of a pain in the ass you are. And it comes across that you don't trust them when really you care so much and you want to be involved in everything. But if you want to, you can't have both. You can't want to be involved in everything and want to scale something really big. So you have to do your best to train people, to talk about culture, to talk about decision making. And another great tool I learned from a back on my feet board member was this thing called red, yellow, and green. And it's how they trained their staff at Accenture. So they would create things like if you were a manager at a Solidcore studio, Scott, we would say, here's your red, yellow, and green. The things in the red, you don't have authority to make decisions on, right? Like you can't change the pricing for the studio. You can't do this and this and this. Here are the things that are in the green that not just you have agency to do, but like we need you to feel comfortable doing that. Oh, yeah. Right. You need to manage the schedule. You need to drive the revenue. Here's your budget. Here's your goals. You need to be able to like manage this and not come to us at the end of the month and say like, well, we didn't meet our numbers. Like that's not going to fly. So I found that it actually makes the relationship between the manager and the one that they're managing a lot better when expectations are clear. You understand the sandbox you're playing in. You understand the agency that you have to make decisions, and you understand why you can't make decisions, not just because I said so, but I explained them to you of like why we can't have different pricing at this studio versus studio 4 blocks down the road.
That makes a ton of sense. So when you build out systems, processes, when you let the team have ownership over certain things, I love that framework. I've never heard that framework before. I know, like, for example, for personal prioritization, you'll have like an urgent, important, or like an Eisenhower where you know your task, but then you basically take that and you deploy it across your whole team. So they know exactly what they should be focusing on. That's step one. So step one in scaling is systems processes plus giving them ownership over certain tasks. What are some other points in a company's growth that break the company? So outside of starting to, again, allow individual Solidcore studios to have their own management, and you have that whole sort of organizational chain, what are some other things that can break the company as it grows?
Yeah, I think what can break the company a lot is the founder not understanding what their skill sets are and wanting to always just be in charge and lead things. There is a reason why I promoted Brian Myers when we had 70 some studios. I'm not a great CEO of a bigger company. I don't like things that are monolithic. I like to move quickly and I like to make decisions quickly and swiftly. And I don't want to go through a whole approval process. I don't want, like, I have a hard time kind of like democratizing things, to be honest. Like, I'm not a really great manager of people. I can work with high level people, but I don't like managing a lot of people. And so I think when the founder doesn't realize that their skill sets may or may not line up with the needs of the business anymore, and they're too attached to it, that they just continue to hang on, even though that they're not the right person to do it. So Brian, who's the current CEO of Solidcore, is such a better operator than I am. He is way better with like playing in the systems and processes once they've been built. And like, he won't make decisions quickly. You know, he'll get buy-in from folks, and like, sure, things will take longer, but that's Brian's leadership style. And he's okay with that. Where I'm like, you know, a child throwing a tantrum, and I'm like, how come this can't be done tomorrow? You know, like, that's the startup, the energy that
Founder mode.
right, right.
But it does take a different kind of person.
It does.
I think that self-awareness is a superpower as a founder, because I've seen founders try and ride out companies to IPO. And I don't think I mean, it can be done, but I think that there's much more efficient ways to do it.
And Scott, like, most of us think about when things end. Endings get really messy for most things in our life. And after leaving back on my feet, like, I did a good job of putting a board in place, and like, but I didn't succession plan. There wasn't like we had to like go through an executive search, find someone, whatever. I wasn't grooming somebody. And I'm like, I'm not going to make that mistake again. And I wanted my exit at Solidcore to be joyous, to be self-aware, to be on my terms, and to be celebratory and like super happy. I didn't want to ever be forced out. I didn't ever want to feel like I fucking hate this place. I can't wait to leave. I didn't want to work for somebody else. And I was really mindful of that the entire journey, which is why I promoted Brian 2 years before we sold, so that I didn't get stuck with an earnout. I didn't get stuck with private equity saying, okay, we'll buy the company, but Anne's got to stay for the next 2 years.
Which happens
all the time. And like, I just didn't want to do that. And so I wanted a happy ending. And so every decision that I made as we started to be, I'm like, this thing will sell. We are scaling, like, we're raising private equity, like, we will have an exit someday. And I made sure it was a happy ending instead of one that was like,
That's good, because I mean, this is because you were like a second time founder. That's why you had the foresight. I don't think many founders, the first time they build something, think that far out. I actually, just a thought, and then I'll let you, like, I know you have a comment on that, but one thing that I think you've done very well is in your life, in your business, everything you do is with the end in mind. And I'm noticing that now more and more, because even before we press record, I'm like, what do you want to chat about? And you're like, well, let's figure out, let's talk about how much money people actually need to make to be happy. And what's the end goal if you're trying to build a business and sell it. Then you're talking about, okay, what's like the next season of my life after making money and after exiting. And you're doing things so purposefully. But I think that a lot of people they kind of just do. And then when the event happens or the exit happens, first of all, they probably didn't plan for it the way that you planned for it. So all those messy things that happen with private equity are happening to them, or all those messy things that happen with the acquisition. But also, then after, they have no plan either, and they don't know what to do next, and they just feel lost and sort of aimless. But I've noticed that you build, or you do, very purposefully.
Yeah. I always tell people, like, work backwards from what the goal is. Yeah. And you need to like be prepared for the close of that chapter. And wouldn't you rather be the one turning the page than someone else turning the page for you? And I think a lot of times with founders, it's like, you don't know where the founder ends and the company begins, right? And that's really dangerous for the company. And a lot of times our ego starts to set in. And don't get me wrong, when I left back on my feet, I'm like, back on my feet's not going to work without me. You know, I'm the lifeblood of this thing. And one of my board members was like, Anne, you better hope this thing works without you. It's actually bad for your reputation because it shows that it was more about you than the company. I'm like, oh my God, like that's such incredible. And I never forgot that. In building Solidcore, I was never the face of the marketing campaigns. I, again, got out of the studios early from a coaching perspective because worst case scenario, people only want to take Anne's class. I can't scale that, you know? So I think, again, I really, really value personal growth, Scott. And you can't have personal growth without endings. And we are so afraid. A lot of people, whenever I public speak, people are like, okay, how many people in the audience want to grow? Everybody's hands go up. But what growth is uncertainty, change, attention, and struggle. So whenever we start to feel like we're growing, we like, I don't want to do that. You know, like we just usually hang on and we play in this sandbox. We were talking about it before we started recording. We play in the sandbox that we're comfortable in because it's what we know. But if you really want to challenge yourself to have multiple chapters and have multiple experiences in your life, the only way to do that is to let something go and have an ending to what you're currently doing, whether it's a relationship, a job, an identity, a belief system, a habit, how you spend your days. Like those things have to really have change. Otherwise, things stay the same.
So when you look at your life, you segment it into seasons and chapters, and that's how you go through life now. You don't find that enough people do that.
I think most people, 76% of people at the end of their life have regret, not because of what they said, not because of what they did, but because of what they didn't do. Most of us, Scott, play it safe, even founders, because we do it once and we stay too long because we don't know what to do next and we know what to do next. So we're just going to stay here and it's going so well. And we have the notoriety and we have the accolades and all these things. And trust me, as if like when I was getting ready to leave back on my feet, all of those fears and doubts flooded me. And it was like, oh my God, like if I'm no longer, like I was the coolest girl at the cocktail party. Let me tell you about my friend Anne. Like you have to hear about her life story and starting this and running with the homeless. Like it's a cool story. I mean, I was getting national media. I was getting awards at Celtics games at Philly. I mean, it was like any honor that anybody could give. It was like, give it to Anne. And so there's this moment that's like, are people going to think I'm special anymore if I don't do this?
Your identity is so wrapped up in it.
Totally. Yeah. And what if I can't build something else? Like, am I just a one-hit wonder? Like, what if I got lucky? All of these doubts come in. And so then that became the drive of like, no, I am smart enough. I can figure this out. And there was a moment, Scott, when I was building Solidcore and I didn't open the studio yet. It hadn't opened. And I was nervous because all my money was going in. And if you remember back in 2013, I mean, people who didn't live in DC won't, but boutique fitness, there was no Soul Cycle. There was no Orange Theory. There was nothing. And so anybody that I would talk to about that, they'd be like, wait, what is it? And like, I don't it's the only, like, so that's the only workout you're going to offer? Like, what if people don't like it? And I was like, you don't get it. Like, you don't get it. And it was like the same with Back on My Feet when like people didn't get how I was going to build that into a nonprofit. It's like, you're just running with guys who are homeless. Like, how do you build this into something? And so
it's very blue ocean. It's very blue ocean. Yeah. And that's scary.
It is scary.
You can't even look for a reference point in the market saying like, this is how it's already been done. So I can just copy that and be okay.
But I have also learned, because I'm not the smartest person in the room, I get a big benefit by finding things that like haven't been created yet. No one had built an organization helping the homeless through running. That alone was like, people would be like, wait, what? I have to know more. So I used that to raise money. Solidcore, like no one had ever done a workout like that before. So I continued to maximize and optimize off the fact that my marketing pitch for the first several years was the hardest workout you've never done. And people were like, I've done all the workouts. I'm like, you haven't done this. And so anyway, and then I got offered $75K before I opened my first studio for 30% of my business. That was a lot of money to me back then. And it was also someone believing in me. And I'm like, God, that would be really smart. Maybe I should actually take that money. And as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I was like, if I take that money, all I'm going to do is say, thank you very much. Now I'm doubting myself. Now I'm hedging my bets. If this thing starts to get hard, well, I can lean into this $75K. And at least I didn't use all my money. You start to justify this decision and that was a good decision. instead of being all in and forced to figure it out.
When you started to think about selling and exiting Solidcore, what was that process? So obviously now you've proven that you can do this again. But the difference is the first time you had to build something, money was a big, the second time, you had to build something, money was still a big motivator.
Yeah.
If this exit goes to plan, and at this point, you're years into Solidcore and you understand like the potential multiples you could get off the exit. So you understand that money's not going to be an issue anymore. Does that mess with your sense of self-worth and identity? Because now you're like, listen, whatever I do next, I don't really need the money. So I don't really need to be an entrepreneur anymore. So then what am I?
What a great question. So for the money piece, I took money off the table in every round I raised.
Smart. Not everybody does.
And the reason I'll tell you that's smart, and Sam Parr had a conversation about this, he didn't do that. And so when his exit came, he was salivating for $20 million, and I had taken 6 in the first round and 9 in the second. So I was only going to sell. And so I had gotten used to having money. You know what I mean? It wasn't like going to be like, I've been starving my entire life and putting every ounce and dollar into here, so any amount of money is going to be, amazing and worth it and more than I've ever thought of before. So when the big exit came, I got to call the terms, and I negotiated another $10 million beyond my equity value simply because I could, and saying, this was always my number. I'm not taking less. If that doesn't work for you, we don't have to do this deal and don't have to sell.
That's ballsy though still, because at this point, you're only like 15, 16 million versus like the potential almost 8-figure exit that you could have.
Yeah, but I still believed in the business. So I was never like...
Or almost 9-figure, but again, almost 9-figure, sorry.
It's okay. But I still believe, like, I knew the future of Solidcore was going to be what it is, and they just had another transaction. So I never had doubts of, oh my God, I know something that these guys don't know and I have to sell and get this money. I was like, I'm happy to do this deal today if you can get me to this number. If not, we don't have to do it, and then we'll just go back to market in a year, and I'll sell then, since I was the controlling owner of the business. And because everybody else believed in the future of the business and saw what it was becoming and could be, they agreed to the terms. And so, yes, after the exit, listen, I've had a really interesting 1.5 years post-exit, like figuring out my money relationship, figuring out now that there's not quote unquote more money coming, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, what's expensive versus what I used to think was expensive. And I've actually spent money, Scott, just to spend it and see how it feels. Because if I didn't do that, I would continue to play small. And what I mean by that is, if you have X amount of money and it's public, right? I made close to $100 million, on this exit. And I remember the mosquito system we're putting in our backyard at our new house, and it was like 10 grand. And I'm like, 10 grand for a mosquito system? Like, who does that? Who spends that? And I'm like, I have to spend this money, because if I don't flex my muscle on spending it, what's the point of having it? So you have to raise the bar on what you'll pay for. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? But spending 10 grand to never have mosquitoes in our backyard that we're going to be in all the time, I'd probably pay 25 grand for that. You know what I mean?
But it does redefine your relationship with money a lot. And not everybody's good at managing that. And some people, there's like sort of 2 ends to the spectrum, right? Some people, money was never the objective anyways, kind of like yourself. Money was nice, but it was never the objective. So they dive right back into work. Some people, they get a payout, they just spend like crazy. They destroy their whole life just spending as well. I think a more healthy version of post-exit is you have money, you develop a healthy relationship with it, you figure out what your new sort of benchmark is for spending. So you're comfortable spending on nice things, but also you find purpose that is outside of money, and it doesn't just become your next identity, which is just spending, which is a horrible identity to have.
Yeah. So I got comfortable with money through spreadsheets, right? Like, I put all my money in there, what we spend on a monthly basis, how much my money is making on average, conservatively. And like, then you're like, okay, great. I don't need to worry about money anymore and like worry about not having enough and chasing more, because I put the data in front of me. And as long as I continue to live and do this, like, everything is fine. Because as you know, Scott, when you step in and having money, a lot of people's self-identity, or sorry, self-worth gets connected to their net worth. And it's like, well, now I have this, now I need more. Now I need more.
I just want to take a second to thank the HubSpot Podcast Network for supporting today's episode. Now, if you like Success Story, you're going to love other shows in the network. One of my favorites is the Hustle Daily Show. It's hosted by Juliet Bennett-Ryla, Rob Litterist, Ben Berkeley, and Mark Dent. It's brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network, which is really the audio destination for business professionals. Now, the Hustle Daily Show brings you a healthy dose of this irreverent, offbeat, informative takes on business and tech. I was just listening to an episode to give you an example of what they talk about. So they broke down how this 100-year-old organization has created one of the most successful business models in the world. Not only does this organization teach young entrepreneurship, they generate over $1 billion in annual cookie sales. And what I really love about the show is they take these stories and these businesses that we think we know, and then they reveal these surprising angles that we never considered. So I really think that you should go listen to the Hustle Daily Show wherever you get your podcasts. It's one of my favorites. You're not going to regret it. And it's so wild to me that people get scared about losing it. It with hundreds of millions of dollars. I have friends who've sold for more than 100 million, and the first thought when they get the wire is, oh my God, how do I not fuck this up?
Right.
Which is insane. Like you could put it into a pretty relatively low risk investment and be earning 4% annually. And I mean, like that's more than most people will ever spend.
Totally. And those come from, again, belief systems, probably from, or something happened where their parents lost all their money, where it's like the one day everything was gone. It's like, this could happen, to me. But that's why you have to have this money practice every day. And like, I think one of the greatest books ever written was You're a Badass at Making Money by Jen Sincero.
I don't know this book.
You have to, she's really good because she didn't have money. She's manifesting money. She makes people write letters to money. And like, she's like, dear money, I love you so much, but you never come around. Like, it's really clever. And it's all around getting you into this state of abundance. And I was talking to a friend before I got here, and I was saying, my mom's a public school teacher. She's actually sitting in a place, she retired when she was 55 and now she's 70. I won't tell how much money my mom has, but like, she had to work so hard for that money, Scott, and it took her so long to make it. So how do you think she treats it? She suffocates it because it took years and decades to have this much. My mom will die with that money in her account because she feels like it's irresponsible to spend it because of how hard she had to work for it. And so now that I worked hard for Solidcore, right? There are a lot of people out there who worked a lot harder than I did. Don't get me wrong. I feel like I work smart. But now when I can sit here on a daily basis and I see what my money is making, and I no longer have to work for money, that money works for me. I give money away all the time. I share it. I always pick up, obviously they didn't, like that's small potatoes, but like I am constantly in a state of abundance and I'm constantly spending it, because I think if you stop spending it within my realm of my budget that I know I need to live in, then you get caught back up in the game of like, oh, let me just see if I can get this number higher. I'm just going to try to get
Well,
this.
that's such an interesting perspective.
Yeah. If I'm like, I haven't spent money recently, I need to go I'll donate something, I'll give it away, or I'll go buy something. I'll take my friends on a trip.
Well, because, okay, so I think this is interesting. Like the conversation about money is always taboo and people feel very uncomfortable speaking about it. That's actually why, I mean, what Sam did with MoneyWise was so cool, because he unpacks what you spend on. And I think a lot of people are very apprehensive about that. And I don't really know after you've made some why you're still apprehensive, but I think it's just because not many people come from money. Most people in our circle, they make it themselves, right? But a lot of people's relationship with money is very unhealthy. And even after they get it, I mean, the amount of money required to live your dream life, most people's dream lives, take any vacation they want, have a private chef, do whatever, get a $10,000 mosquito system. It actually doesn't take that much money. So once you have any sort of exit event, money becomes more of a game and a way to keep score than anything. But that's still something that people get caught up into. Yeah. Like I'm very pro-capitalist. I'm not anti-billionaire by any means, but I think that people who are billionaires more often than not have a little bit wrong with them, that they keep playing this game. Like they keep playing this game again and again and again and again. And good for them, because they create some incredible things that can change humanity. But there is no need for one person to ever keep playing that game that long. it doesn't benefit them tangibly anymore to own another sports team. It's not that there's an issue with it, but I think that personally, that is not what most people actually aspire to achieve. Most people just want to spend, I don't know what the number is, $100,000 a month would be more than most people can even think about.
Yeah, I think that's what, because again, you get caught up in the game, right? So again, and it's like, for an entrepreneur, money's a trophy, right? Like when I got that exit, it was like, I did a really good job. That's all it was for me, is like, I built something of such incredible value that I have people at the table willing to pay me X amount of multiple for it. And that feels really cool and really good. And I think that's why people go to do it again, because we want the validation and feeling smart and whatever. And then again, there are some people who get caught up in, oh my God, I'm never going to have enough. If you don't have an end game in anything, it's always going to be more. The answer is, I always need more. So you're going to chase that. And then your self-worth gets tied up in your net worth, right? If that number is not going up, you're irresponsible. You're doing something wrong. I mean, I talk about this a little bit, but have you read that book, Die with Zero?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I think that's such an amazing thing. And when people ask me what I'm doing right now, I'm like, I move my body for 4 to 6 hours every day, right? My priority right now is optimizing my very healthy body, playing beach volleyball, playing paddle or padel, whoever is listening to it, and working out for 90 minutes a day at the gym. I love it. I love being physically exhausted at the end of the day. And people are like, do you ever work? I'm like, 1, I don't need to. And 2, if you don't think that's work, why don't you go spend 4 to 6 hours a day, like moving your body like that? But I am in that optimization phase of experience and physical health and moving my body and playing and having fun. Like,
I love that though. You know how many people they sell a company and then they go right into, okay, now I'm an investor. And then you've applied a label to yourself and you're like, now I got to figure out how to be good at investing. And they didn't even take a break. It's like they just went, and by the way, just because you or you build a company, sell a company does not mean you're an investor. Like, trust.
also, Scott, like, I'm like, okay, if I want to do that and I want to do this, then I'm back to sitting in front of a computer and on the phone all day. Like, I don't want that for my life. Like, I want to have this phase right now where I can go at 2:00 in the afternoon and go play padel and go play a card game, go fly to North Dakota, take a private flight, fly to North Dakota, watch my nephew play football, go spend 3 days with them and fly home. Like, that's the phase I am right now, is spontaneity, experiences, and as much physical activity as I possibly can.
Was it difficult to change your identity from entrepreneur, founder to this stage of your life, this season of your life? And sort of two-pronged question, was it difficult? And I think the answer, I think I know what you're going to say, but also, how did the rest of the world perceive?
Yeah. So I think everybody, I mean, the ink was barely dry, and it's like, what's next? And people say things like, oh, you're never going to let grass grow underneath your feet. And they always associate that with like money, working, like, it's like, oh, so you're just playing whatever. I'm like, yeah, I'm playing a lot of sports and activity and doing
Family office yet?
well, yeah, and like my friend is like, and Mahlum PE. I'm like, no, I don't want to do any of that. And Scott, I do some investing, but like only if I'm like super excited about. It's not part of my, identity. I don't think. Like, one thing I really like about myself is you could go talk to any private equity partner and any guy that I've ever met in one of the homeless shelters and be like, tell me who Anne is, and they'd be like, she's funny, she's playful, she's cracking jokes, she's competitive, she's whatever. Like, that's who I am. And I think the adjectives that describe me as a person is much more important to me than like my label as of a profession, And that's the phase that I'm in, because for a long time, I was really focused on achievement because I associated achievement with love. And even my marriage, like, I love my husband so much. And he's the only person I've ever loved that I have never been focused on what he does or his potential. And I think it's because I finally love myself enough that like I don't love myself anymore based off of what I can achieve or build or create an impact for everybody else. Like, I'm good with who I am as a human. So that allowed me to be in a capacity to just love him for being a human and not on his career, how much money he makes, or any of that stuff.
So I want people to, I do want people to take these lessons to heart, because what I don't want somebody to say is, well, it's easy to say that when you have $100 million.
Yeah.
So how does somebody take these, and again, I don't think everybody needs $100 million. I think that there's a lot of ways to be very comfortable. And what would be the advice for somebody who wants to feel the way you feel, comfortable with their own accomplishments, comfortable with their own achievements? I don't want that person to have their whole self-worth tied into their job, even if they're making 100 grand a year. Like, what's the exercise that that person can go through so that they know what their own North Star is and they can achieve it and they can feel comfortable
Yeah.
and not be part of this
Right.
stupid rat race that everybody's in?
So that's the thing. I think there is a time in life to grind, and there is a time in life to show yourself what you're capable of. You know what I mean? And I think those are, and frankly, my husband is in that place right now. He's younger than I am, and he's still trying to get to his mountain and his pinnacle, and and a lot of my friends still are. And frankly, I have to be careful not to get roped into that. So I don't start like, well, maybe I should create again. Like that's happened a little bit. And I'm like, no, that's your place in life and that's not mine. So I get it and it's important. And I think it doesn't go away until you kind of show yourself a little bit that you are reaching your potential and you can do big, important things if that's something that you're after. Like I would never dream of telling my husband, like, hey, don't worry about that stuff. Like, that's not important. Like, he has a vision and a mission for his life that he wants to fulfill, and he's not going to be satisfied until he does it. So, after you do it, and I've done it a couple of times, the challenge for me is to frankly not do it again. It would be easier for me for my like natural ability to be like, well, I'll just keep doing that because that's what I'm good at. I'm trying to move into that different phase. So I think a way to combat it is to have a goal, set the goal, work for the goal, reach the goal, and then move on. That's how you get comfortable. Again, if you don't have a goal for yourself, Scott, that's the chasing more. Well, how much money do you need? I don't know. I just need more. Well, then you're going to feel dissatisfied. You're going to feel um, not worthy, so to speak, or that you're not good enough until you ever get to win. Like it's amazing to have a goal, reach it.
So it's wild to me that people don't actually put enough thought into what's that number that's going to
Do
make.
you have a number?
I do.
You know, share it?
It's 25 million.
Okay.
25 million is my number. And actually I got that number from, I've thought about it a lot, but that number is like if you invest 4% of that, and if you invested that 4% returns, you'll get about $1 million.
So let me ask you, do you have to earn that money yourself? What if you won the lottery or someone died and you got 25 million? Would you feel the same about that 25 million?
No.
Okay. So you want to earn it.
I want to earn it myself. Yeah, probably. I do want to earn it myself. Yeah. That's a very arbitrary number. So that number is not going to fundamentally change how I live my life right now. Right. I think that, there's a couple things like maybe, put a little bit more money and help my parents out and whatnot. Like there's other people that I could take care of, but I love the work that I do. This is like a job now. I absolutely love it. It's so much fun.
Which is how cool is that, right?
Very cool. And I mean, whether or not this makes good money for what it is, but whether or not it made 100x more than what it does right now, it wouldn't change my love for it because I loved from day zero when I could sit down across from some of the coolest people in the world and have a conversation with them. Yeah. And that's work. So it's a good question. I don't know. It wouldn't stop me from doing this. That's for sure.
Right.
It wouldn't stop me from doing this.
But that's the cool thing, to sit and be like, okay, if I have, this is like the work and the money practice that I sort of, and that book will really, I think, be helpful to you and a lot of other people. It forces you to sit down and say, okay, if I had that, as you just said, it's not actually about that. It's about you showing yourself you can make and earn that, and that's a different answer than just what the number is. My husband's the same way. It's like because we're married, have X amount of money. And he's like, I want to earn it, because for him and for a lot of us, money equals trophy. Money equals I was smart enough to figure it out. I did a good job. And that's really what we're chasing. We're not chasing the money. We're chasing the emotion around it.
And I've actually thought about, I've thought about like different ways to make my number, and I still want to make it doing something I love. So for example, this is the podcast right now. This is basically the main thing that I'm focused on, and it doesn't make that much money, but it makes some money. But I've thought like, okay, so if I keep growing this, and then you can increase the ad revenue significantly, you can do these crazy Spotify deals if it ever got that big. You can also use the podcast as a marketing vehicle, and then you can take small equity positions in startups. And if they have product alignment with the audience, and you can use the podcast that way too. So there's a lot of different ways, because I'm building media at the end of the day, right? So I can use it for a lot of different ways to make that. But even if I made that, I'd still do this because I still enjoy it. I wouldn't want to retire at all.
But those are the great questions to ask about money, you know, and I didn't realize that until the exit. I didn't realize that, frankly, my motivation for work would be as low as it is. It really is. Like, someone will literally offer me like, and I'll give you $5,000 for an hour of your time. And I'm like, I don't need the $5,000. Like, you know, if you really want my time that bad, sometimes I'm like, just call me. I have 30 minutes right now. What do you need? You know what I mean? It's like, that's not worth it to me. And I don't have to deal with you sending me a W-9 and tax form. I'm not doing that. You know, so like, my money makes money for me, and I don't really need to do anything else from the financial perspective. So you start to say, well, if that's no longer on the table, how would you spend your time? And that becomes the ultimate resource.
But if I'm still doing the same thing, then I'm sort of doing this thought experiment live, but I haven't really thought about it before. If I'm still doing the same thing, then does the number really matter?
Great. Exactly. And so this is why I pulled into your yard in my Bentley. You know, I'm like, I'm going to go buy a Bentley. And I love my Bentley. I drive it every day.
Beautiful. It's a very nice color.
Yeah, I know. It's like unique and blue, and it's very Anne. But I'm like, I love that car. And then I actually, you know, I'd never owned a handbag before, like all these women in their handbags. I'm like, I'm going to go buy a few of those. And I'm like, that doesn't do it for me. I'm never going to buy another one ever again. But you have to play around with some of these things. And how I spend my day is pretty much, think about what I just said. I don't really need a lot of money we never go out to eat because we like to cook at home. Like, I'd rather have people at our house in Miami than go on some trip where we're sitting somewhere, because we have a beach volleyball court in our backyard and I want to do that. We sauna and cold plunge every day. I listen to podcasts. I'm reading. I'm like, this doesn't actually cost that much.
It doesn't cost a lot. Like, okay, so maybe if I had the 25 million, I'd buy a nice place for my parents. I'd buy a nicer place for us, because we live in a very expensive city. So, I mean, the sky's the limit when you come to real estate in Miami. But outside of that, I don't spend that much money.
I know. And think about what makes you happy. It's the same thing. It's like, money doesn't we'll spend money on convenience things, right? Like, we have someone come and clean and do our laundry and dishes 2-3 times a week. That's just not something we want to do.
Yeah, but that's not that much.
I know. No, but I'm just saying from a money perspective. And like, yeah, we will fly, but when we're like, oh my God, we have a connecting flight. My family's in North Dakota, so it's not easiest to get to. We will spend that. And like, we just spent $60,000 on a private flight there, because I'm like, this is worth it. I want to go watch the kids play. We either fly in and get in at 1 a.m. in the morning. Like, we're not doing that. So we will spend things on money that, like,
you know what? I don't even like, if I had all the money in the world, I don't even like traveling that much outside of family.
Oh my God, finally. So like, Brett and I say that all the time. It's a pain in the ass. You get off your schedule. You're eating more crap food. You're not sleeping in your own bed. So that is a great example. We have a beautiful home. We have a $12 million home, and it's an amazing pool, sauna. We have 4 people coming over tonight to play volleyball. I'm like, put as much money into this home as possible so people want to come here, and we get to stay here. And we get to facilitate community and host people and cook dinner. And like, that is my ideal way to spend time.
And you know what? So you don't know Gina, you'll meet her eventually, but this is actually why, on a smaller scale, it's not a $12 million home, but like, for us, it was like, we had a house in Toronto, then we had a condo in Fort Lauderdale. And then we're like, we can't do condo. Like, Gina loves entertaining. She loves doing like tablescapes and like putting all this shit together. Like, she really, actually, she has her own business now, but before she did that, she was actually a trained chef. She loves to cook, right? And we couldn't entertain at all. So we're like, let's get a house closer to Miami. 2 birds, 1 stone. First of all, we'll have the house where you can like entertain, and then I'll build out a podcast studio so I can do my job too. And this is perfect for us. So like, yes, I mean, if we had an extra $25 million cash lying around, the house would be a couple square feet bigger, but the day in the life wouldn't change that much. It'd be, maybe we can have, we already have an extra bedroom for her family. We already have an extra bedroom for her sisters. Like, okay, maybe we have like 2 families stay over at the same time, as opposed to just one family. Like, I have my family and her family stay over around holidays or whatever it is. But life doesn't change that much.
It doesn't. And again, money, it's like, my family's coming down for Thanksgiving and I'm flying them all down here. It's like, I'm taking care of all, like, don't worry about any, like, you guys are making the effort to come to us. I'm taking care of all the expenses. I love to be able to do stuff like that. So, and again, this is the great thought exercise to do, Scott, because then you stop to stress it. You're like, I really don't need that much more money. Why am I stressing about constantly needing it? And everybody always asks for money advice. And like, there's literally a gamut of questions you have to ask somebody before you give them money advice based off of, do you have enough? Are you overspending? What's your mindset? What do you want money for? Like, are you in a position like wherever where you have enough, but you're constantly stressed? There's just so many levels to money, and it can really continue to cause chaos in your brain no matter how much you have if you don't get ahead of it.
This is why when you start to build something, you have to think about what kind of business you want to build. So I think that most people are better suited to build lifestyle businesses as opposed to trying to raise VC money. And just like the second you raise VC money, all of a sudden now there's like this clock, and you have to get them returned in like a very short period of time. And it's going to be stressful, and you're going to play this startup game. And if you don't even raise properly, or if you don't take money off the table, or if you dilute yourself too early, I saw a story of a dude who sold, I've referenced the story like 5 times on this podcast. I should probably get his name. But I saw a story of a dude, it was on Twitter. And the reason why it came up is because like sometimes Facebook does a good job of like bringing back memories from like past posts and shit. And I did like a reel on Facebook about this guy. And it was about the dangers of taking on VC money, because he sold his company for something like $237 million. That was the exit. But the entire time he was raising, he was paying himself like a small salary, like under $100K, being super frugal. He raised a round that was at a higher valuation than $237 million. Business didn't go the way that he wanted to, had to do a down round, and he didn't have pref shares, so he got nothing. He got nothing out of a $237 million business except 10 years of work, pulling in like an $80,000 or $90,000 salary. And I'm like, that's not.
I'm like literally heartbroken for him.
I have to find his name because it was a wild story, and this tweet thread went viral. And I'm sure, it's a decent sized exit, so you know the name of the company. But the point is, the Silicon Valley raise money, hustle version of entrepreneurship, just because you want to have like a $100 million exit is not all that is cracked out to be.
And let me even give you an example. Barry's Bootcamp.
Yeah.
So they've been for sale, and that deal just got taken off the market. They've been for sale twice. Yeah. And Barry's, people look at Barry's and they're like, oh my God, they're sort of this big player in the space. Even Barry's can't sell, right? Because some of the deal structure that they did before is complicated. They're not growing fast enough. Their CapEx costs are too expensive. They opened 7 studios or something this year. They've been around for 25, 30 years. These people have been in it for so long, and like, they're not going to get the exit. And like, they have a ton of studios. They're doing great from the outside. You have to nail it. Like I will give props to Solidcore. Like, we nailed it on every single level. And I got attention. I got effort in my first round. I'm like, what does private equity look for? Because now I'm in it, and I have to make sure I'm building a company that is attractive to private equity, because now I have a private equity partner, and at some point we're going to have to sell. So you have to like look at for whatever line of business you're in, with a business like Solidcore where you have brick and mortar, your payback period matters, your CapEx costs matter, even your security deposits, right? Because they're entire liabilities. So we didn't do any of those after like the first 10 studios. We did none of them. Obviously, the amount of revenue you generate, and then your EBITDA and corporate EBITDA, you have to be, anybody out there in fitness, you need to get to 40, 50% profit margins in your studio. Like, if you can't,
or no one's going to look at it.
No one will look at it. You need to have a $750K minimum revenue per box. Minimum. Closer to $1 million gives you a better shot. Your NPS score needs to be great. Your structure, your processes, your legal compliance. Everything has to be buttoned up on so many levels to get private equity to be interested in what you're doing, because people think like, ooh, private equity is risky. Scott, they are the most risk-averse people I've ever met. They do not want to lose their money or the money of their LPs, and they're going to do everything possible to protect their investment with preferred returns, tie you up every which way, so you are the last person paid. Like, it's cutthroat, and that's what you're signing up for.
How did you? I'm so curious, because you took money off the table in the first 2 rounds. How did you negotiate those deals so that you would eventually be in a better spot and you could sort of have the power to say yes or no to the private equity, because you didn't care about money anymore, which is a great spot to be in?
Yeah. So the first round, they didn't want to give me the 6 million at all. They were like, well, is she going to disappear? Is whatever. And my response was, I've opened 25 of these in 3.5 years. If you think that I'm in this for 6 million, if you have any of those doubts, you shouldn't do this deal, right? Like, give me a little bit more credit for the value of this business that I'm created. If I did that with no money, imagine what I can do with the money you're giving me. And so I just sort of said that, and I had multiple suitors, right? So I'm like, I get it. If you have doubts about me and my capabilities, to whatever, I'm like, I want to win. Like, I'm not going to go away and like crawl in a hole. Like, I want to win this game. I started it. I'm going to have the biggest, the best, the most well-known, prominent brand in this space. And I'm looking for a partner who believes and trusts in me. And if, again, you think me taking $6 million off the table is going to demotivate me, you shouldn't do this deal. Right. Right. And it was the same with the sort of the second round of like, I owned so much of the business that me taking some money off the table shouldn't make you feel whatever. What if I'm going to be left with X amount and here's my upside? Yeah. Like, you think I'm going to walk away from that or not be motivated? So I just told them, like, it's really important for me to continue to build my wealth. And I frankly didn't lie to them. I don't want to be in a situation when I get into an exit where I make a bad decision for myself financially. I want to make a decision based off of the value of the company that I built. And I think I won't do that if I'm starved for cash.
Smart.
Yeah.
Very, very smart.
Yeah. I advise everybody to take something like.
And I think that you have to have a little bit of confidence in your own worth to be able to do that.
Your ability to grow. So my first round, I did a 2.5 pref, right? Like, these guys were like, okay, and we'll give you 6 million, but that obviously raises the valuation of the business. And I'm like, no problem, because I did the math, knew what I needed to do. I know that if I take your money, I can get to 100 studios, which we would have done, but COVID got in the way. And so I had no problem taking on that deal. And then we did a growth round after COVID, which was a little more complicated because, the business was obviously not as performing well, but I still pushed for a really hefty valuation by giving these next people also a preferred return, knowing that I had, great, if I need to be in this for another 3-4 years.
In mind.
Again.
In global catastrophe, you're like, outside of this happening.
Right.
I have my benchmarks pre-COVID. We can go back to that.
Yeah. And I just believed in the power of in-person fitness, knowing that just like 9/11, no one's going to fly again. Okay. No one's going to go to a gym again. Like, do you remember all those articles? Like, the gyms are dead. I'm like,
which was so stupid because during COVID, first of all, I couldn't find fitness equipment at any store. Yeah. I ended up buying, it was when I was still in Toronto, I ended up buying like this horrible, like, probably made in like the 1970s kind of like home fitness machine for some dude that was selling it on Facebook. Like, anything I could find, and I'm sure I paid like 5 times how much it was actually worth, but anything that I could find, I was like, I can't go to the gym, I have to like get some shit in my house. And then I knew people that own gyms that were like secretly opening them up and illegally opening them up, and like I knew that the gym scene was going to come back. Like, it wasn't even a question.
And that's why we raised January 21 and we opened 11 studios, and we said, we're opening in the red states. We're just going to don't focus.
Smart.
Yeah, because we couldn't operate. I mean, DC was still like shut down. It was like, okay, this month open, this month not. So we got a leg up on all the competition. Obviously, fitness came back in droves, and like we were crushing it. Like, we went back to pre-COVID levels by the end of like early 2022.
Very good. That's fast.
It was fast.
And like all the competition, so to speak, they were all slow.
They were playing defense. They were still playing defense while we were playing offense. Yeah.
Wow. After you sold, actually, no, I put out a post last night about the questions that, they're not that, it's a very smart audience. I was like, these are very good questions. A lot of people were interested in the actual sale. So, we kind of have like the lead up to the sale. We understand like why you're in a good negotiating position, but a lot of people were just curious about, okay, like, how do you find the right partner who's going to make the acquisition, the right private equity firm? Why not strategic buyers? How do you make sure that the private equity firm that buys is going to take care of the company after you leave and not destroy what you've built? So just a lot of questions around like your thought process when you eventually decided, okay, I do want to sell this. All those questions. How do I find the right person? How do I make sure this goes well?
Yeah. So the right people, a lot of times are people who come to the table. You can't control some of that. Like, we didn't have a strategic option that came to the table in 2023. We had private equity. And so that particular deal was VMG, who was our minority partner at the time. They wanted to buy it. They wanted to be majority. They believed so much in the business. They'd only been in it for 2 years. They weren't ready to sell. They were like, And, you keep talking about ready to sell. What if we can figure out a partner to come in, buy you out? We take majority. And I'm like, great, here's my number. As long as we can get to this number, I'm great with that. And I trusted BMG because I'd worked with them for 2 years. McConnell Smith was our lead partner over there. And the management and the leadership team was crushing it at Solidcore, so.
And it says, and when you had these second conversations with BMG, you had already, the CEO, Brian.
Yeah.
Brian was already in CEO.
Brian was already there for 2 years. So I had obviously seen him lead and, the company was doing great. And listen, when your company is doing great and having some margins that Solidcore does, they're not going to really change much of what we're doing. So I felt like we were protected because we built such a great business. That's why you had so many suitors. Nobody had ever came in, Peterson, BMG, and then Kohlberg, who came in last year. No one wanted to ever change anything about what we were doing. It was like, grow it faster. Like, this is working, add water to it. And so I know that's, listen, Elle Catterton, who just recently, now purchased Solidcore and is the majority owner, I think by like 90+%. I know I didn't have conversations with them because I had sold my shares last year, but they're going to continue to build it and grow it and take it international. You know what I mean? Like, they have a great reputation in this space. The whole management team is staying. It is simply, let's get 30, 40, 50 of these things open, per year. It's hard to mess with the economics of what the business is doing already.
I want to take a second and thank Range Rover Sport for supporting today's episode. Now, let's talk about tools that match your ambition, that match the ambition of everybody who's listening today, who has taken risks, who has up-leveled their personal, professional development, who has tried to build their own thing. Everybody listening gets it. There is a moment when the thing you're trying to build, the challenge that you're taking on, it finally starts to take off. There's like this rush of excitement and possibility, and that feeling that you get when you get behind of the wheel of a Range Rover Sport, because we've all had that perfect drive when the road, the car, and you're all in perfect harmony. But that's not just by chance. The Range Rover Sport is designed to make every drive feel that way. And the Range Rover Sport is not just for impressing others. It's how you feel behind the wheel. It's how you feel when things are going the way they're supposed to go. Whether or not you're navigating city streets, you're exploring back roads, the Range Rover Sport combines refinement with a sense of adventure. It matches your own versatile lifestyle. With features like adaptive off-road cruise control, you can tackle challenging terrain with confidence. The dynamic air suspension always makes sure you get a smooth ride. It responds to road conditions for optimal performance. So from daily commutes to weekend getaways, the Range Rover Sport is ready for whatever you have planned. It's more than just a vehicle. It is a companion for all of your journey. So if you're ready to elevate your driving experience, visit LandRoverUSA.com and configure your Range Rover Sport today. It's amazing. Also, I was curious because you mentioned this before we press record as well. We spoke a lot about sort of how you think through this period of your life and what you prioritize and what you want to focus on, but you did not start. Well, you did almost start something new, but you chose not to. And I'm just curious about, I know that we touched on it, but why did you not follow through with that? Why did you not want to build something? Because forget about just like becoming an investor. I don't know many entrepreneurs that have successful exits that don't just end up going to build something again if they don't like investing.
Yeah, I think because it would have felt like the same thing over and over again. And now, listen, you have a little bit of naivete on your side when you're like I was a nonprofit founder, right? And then I was moving into the for-profit space. Neither one I had done before. And so when you have naivete and drive and ambition on your side, you don't know what you don't know. And you're just like so excited to go into it. But now that you know what you know afterward, like I know the journey that it takes. And like, I didn't want to have that same replicated process. I'm like, that's not going to be a fulfilling life for me to do the same thing again, to start another fitness company, again. I'm just going to do a somewhat version of that. And as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, it's like, if I'm really into growth, I have to be even more particular, Scott, on how I spend my time, because a lot of people out there need money. They have to work. They're making decisions based off of how I'm getting paid, all those things. I don't have that problem anymore. I actually think I'm obligated to look deeper at how I can make impact, contribution, joy, quality relationships, because I don't have that pressure anymore. And I think it would be foolish for me to continue to be like, oh, I'm doing this to make more money. Like I would actually be disappointed, in myself if I was doing that as the majority of how I would be spending my time.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And also it sort of ties into that book that you referenced before about basically when you die, you don't have any money left. And that whole concept and that sort of a thesis that you've like brought into your life, I think it's a beautiful idea.
And you know how cool it is to call my brother, or like I flew my brother and my nephew and my sister's, I'm sorry, my niece's boyfriend down to Dallas to go watch the Cowboys game on a whim. Like I love being like, Dad, do you want to go sit front like courtside at the Lakers tomorrow? Like that is so cool, and I will spend money on that stuff all day long.
If you look at your journey, like even just describe how your purpose has changed over your life, over your career, because I think that's fascinating too.
Yeah, I think have you heard of Tony Robbins' 6 human needs?
Yes.
Okay, so you know them. So I think let me just try to repeat them. It's security, variety, significance, love, contribution, and personal growth. And mine have always wavered between like personal growth and contribution. That's kind of always, and I would be lying if significance wasn't up there in my 20s, again, chasing love, adoration, and whatever. But security is kind of the bottom of that one for me, and it's always been there. I would rather play the risky game than like play it safe and sit on the sidelines. So personal growth and contribution continue to set the top. I don't really know from a contribution perspective where I'm going to put that energy into quite next. I'm in what I call my white space. What I have learned, I don't really love being an advisor because I kind of feel like I'm sitting on the sidelines a little bit. Like I kind of have to do my own thing, build my own. If I ever put energy into something else professionally, it needs to be my own thing, starting whether a foundation, starting a new nonprofit, starting something else that I build and grow. Now I can invest in things and put money in things, but I don't actually get as interested unless it's my own thing, truth be told.
But that's important to know that. Because if not, then you're kind of setting yourself up for success, for failure. Excuse me. You're not setting yourself up for success. So when you think about like where you're going in the future and where you put your time and energy, it always has to be something that you're building yourself, that you're championing yourself.
Yeah. And it has to be innovative, like I really put back on my feet in Solidcore. We're both innovative in their own industries. And so I would never do something that I'm like, 7 other people are already doing that. Like that I would never be like, I'm starting a furniture company because I like furniture. Like that's just too difficult of a thing to compete for me. And I don't see myself ever getting passionate about that because frankly, now I don't need money. So it would have to be something so innovative that's solving some sort of problem that hasn't been solved yet, whether in, the social impact space, right? Like I think a lot about health and fitness, in impoverished areas and things like that. But I'm not going to jump into that right now. I know in the future, like I shouldn't say 100%, but I'm pretty confident that I will have another entrepreneurial chapter at some point in my life. I just know that I'm not going to go chase it down right now because of the die with zero. I'm in my, I want to play as much as possible phase.
Okay. I have a couple last like lessons that you teach that I've heard you teach on other podcasts. I think they're really great lessons. And you can go into as much depth or as little depth. You can keep it brief if you want. It doesn't matter to me. But the first one that you spoke to Gary about was the importance of women asking for more. So speak to me about what you see with women in entrepreneurship. Like what should they do more of? What are they not doing enough of that you've learned, at least from your experience?
Yeah, I think women in a lot of cases, I've employed a lot of women, right? And the negotiations with women is always different. I remember this particular instance. This woman was one of my rock stars. And it was time to sit down and like discuss her compensation. And I was waiting for her, right, to ask for something. And Scott, it was like looking down at the ground, no eye contact, beating around the bush. I've really done this and like, I would really appreciate. And like, I really think that all these filler words instead of just like the value that you bring to the company and what you've done and like how you can help forward and asking with direct eye contact to me of what you want. That's never happened with me with one woman ever. I've always been like, you should have asked for 50 grand more than what you just asked for. So there is a wage gap. There is a gender gap for sure. And part of that responsibility belongs on women. If you're asking to get paid $75,000 and you get paid $75K, part of that, and the job is worth $130, you have to be confident enough to ask for 130, know what you're bringing to the table. I still think women step into this, I'm just grateful to be here, instead of, no, you should be grateful to have me. Like I am excellent at what I do, and I'm going to add this much value. And I think that women are frankly a little bit more afraid of rejection than men are, and especially in the professional world. And they don't want to miss an opportunity, so they'll take less than, and then find themselves maybe a little bit resentful for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a solution to it, but I've heard similar things where if a guy's applying to a job and he has like maybe 70% of the things required, then he'll still apply, versus if a woman's applying to a job and she doesn't have 100% of the things, she won't apply. And I mean, yes, all of the wage gap is horrible, but obviously I'm a huge believer in owning your own shit and taking responsibility. And I think that, I don't know, maybe it's just hearing from people like yourself that hired a lot of women, sit on the other side, and you're like, why didn't you just ask for more? And you're coaching people through it. Not everybody's going to have a boss as great as you. So I think that they have to take that and be like, okay, so maybe my boss isn't going to tell me that I should have asked for 50 grand more. Let me negotiate, and not negotiate like 2 or 3 grand, because that also looks silly. It's like, ask for a big number. And at least they know that you're worth that.
Yeah, I mean, back on my feet board was a lot of men back in the day, and I was negotiating my salary as the founder, right? They control my salary, and we were 50 grand apart. And this was like in my last year or something there. And I remember telling them that, listen, if you can find someone to come in here and do the job that I do at the level I do it for 50 grand less, you have a fiduciary responsibility to this organization. You should do that. I'm not doing it. Like, I'm not doing it. Like, this is what I bring to the table. If that's not enough value for you based on the results I produce, I get it. And like, obviously I got what I asked for, but there is as like, oh, you're a single woman. Like, this is a lot of money I'm like, stop. Like, a lot of money, right. The money is, what is the value of what I'm producing? What is the value of the job that I'm doing? So I always try to, listen, life isn't fair, Scott. It never has been and it never will be. And the best way to put yourself in a position to win is through empowerment. So we can bitch and complain about the gender gap and the wage gap within it. It's not going to change until women continue to ask and stand up for more and demand more and negotiate more and work on their negotiation skills and explain to you, like, I produced $5 million for this organization, blah, blah, blah. This is my compensation for me to do that.
I actually love that. I love that exact line that you used with your board. I think that's fabulous, because if I was hiring somebody, man or woman, and they said that to me, I'd be like, the confidence this person has, like, you know what, I'm going to bet on this person because of the amount of confidence and conviction. If they take that, not just with the conversation with me, if they take that into everything they do in the company, like, they're going to be a huge asset.
And Scott, how many times have we both hired people that have been like, I'll take less, and like, it never works out. That person doesn't value themselves. Right. They don't think of themselves highly, that they're even capable of doing it. And like, I remember when I hired Brian for the first time and we were 50K apart on salary, and he was just unwavering. And it's just like, and like, listen, this is what my salary requirements are. If you can't meet them, I get it. Like, I'm not coming in there and it was just like, I wanted him, and Brian, and I'll say this now, Brian after a year of working to me could have came to me at any point and asked me for another 100, and I would have done it, because he was so good at what he was doing, the revenue he was creating, the value in the business of what he was doing. And like, if you are currently at a company and you are crushing it, trust me, your boss does not want to lose you. Trust me, your boss would rather pay you 30K more than find somebody else that they hope to cross their fingers that can match the level of performance that you have if you are a high performer.
That's such a good point. And also, when you say things like that, it shows you have options. Like, I don't want to hire somebody where I'm the only person that's even considering hiring you. Like, I don't want that energy in my company. No, like, if you are saying like, this is my price, take it or leave it, I'm like, shit, he's going to go somewhere else. It's almost like you give it to her.
And ladies, I want to be like, sit up straight, like, lean forward, don't lean back. Like, look at me. And make eye contact, make me uncomfortable that you are so like, you're not taking your eyes off of me. That makes you feel like you are in control and you have power. And like, I mean, you see so much of this, right? Like when you're slouching, it just tells you're trying to not be noticed.
Yeah. No, all very good advice. What, the other question I had, founder centric versus founder influenced. What does that mean?
So founder centric means that you're building a company or a brand that's all about
You're
you.
making me sit up more spurry.
But that you're building something that's all about you. And that means that probably the thing won't work without you if you don't go. I think it's really important for the founder to embody the brand of whatever you are building. So Solidcore's tagline, create the strongest version of yourself. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody out there that wouldn't describe me as that way, right? Pushing myself, challenging myself, leveling up, getting other people around me to level up. I embodied that brand. But it was important that the company that the company had an identity outside of Anne, right? So that's when we start telling stories about our clients, about our coaches. Who else creates the strongest version of themselves? So that brand permeates the whole entire experience, from the language that we taught our coaches to be speaking about. It's like how you show up in Solidcore is directly correlated to how you show up outside of here. We gave them these words that really pull the brand ethos into the company. So yeah, that's what it means from a founder centric perspective.
Very, very smart. Like I would say the sort of like the last thing that I actually wanted to touch on. If you go through sort of your life's work and you look at all the things you've accomplished, because I find that people have different opinions on this. Is legacy important to you or not?
Gosh, that's a really good question because I want to do everything I can that I don't think legacy lasts too long. Like you hear of certain people, but like if you didn't have direct relationship with them, it's like, oh yeah, that's nice to know. Henry Ford.
Do you live in like the now or?
Yeah, I live much more in the now. And when I go, I want to, like, I think of my nieces, my nephews, and hopefully my future kids, right? Like how I was able to influence them in ways that makes their life better. And you asked kind of how life was different now, Scott. I am much more focused on quality relationships where for lots of back on my feet in Solidcore, because it was so big in tentacles, it was like quantity, right? There's millions of people, maybe not millions, like hundreds of thousands who've taken a Solidcore class. We have hundreds of thousands of clients, whose lives have improved from Solidcore that I don't have any relationship with, right? But how can I make sure to be spending the time and influence and conversations with my nieces and nephews, with my family, with my close friends, to really encourage them, to empower them to their potential, to have and create whatever life that they want for themselves. It's like also why I love public speaking. Like when I can get in a room with people for an hour and get people to leave after listening to me, that they feel like they can run through a brick wall and change things about their life, like that's really cool to me.
I love that. What would be one thing that I should have asked you, one lesson that you like to teach the audience that I didn't ask you about?
I like to teach the audience that fear and growth have the exact same feeling. So when you feel fear, right, you feel like if I asked you to do something that you're like, oh my God, I don't want to do that. It's your palms start to sweat, you get a little bit of anxiety, your nervous system goes crazy, and that all happens from your amygdala. Your amygdala doesn't know the difference between fear and growth. It just knows uncertainty, attention, change, and struggle. So 99% of the time, when you feel those things, you are being presented with an opportunity for growth, right? There's not a bear in here. There's something that's going to kill us in here. So knowing that when those feelings of fear happen, maybe reframe them that it's not fear, it's opportunity. And most people try to fight with their fear. And I think you have to step into gratitude and be like, oh my God, thank you for that feeling. Like you are presenting me with an opportunity to grow, which I have asked for. And I'm either going to shut you down and make this feeling go away, or I'm going to step into it, right? Whether that's leaving a relationship, moving cities, quitting your job, like whatever the thing is, cutting off your hair, it's going to cause uncertainty. It doesn't mean something's wrong.
I love it. And you lean into it then. You lean into it. You discover what that thing means for you. And I think that's a great lesson. That's a great, I'll leave it at that, because I think that I think that all those opportunities where we fear something or we feel like that response, that's a signal that we're heading in the right direction, or there's like a learning experience or something that we can improve. Like,
But what do most people do? They feel that, and then
they shy away.
something's wrong. Something's
Well, I'll give you a very obvious example like that I feel, because again, you speak on stage, I speak on stage, and I always hated speaking on stage. I'm pretty sure the majority of the world hates speaking on stage. It's like the most first or second most common fear. Yeah. So, the podcast starts going well, starts getting some eyeballs on it. You start getting asked to go speak on stage, and then you go up on stage, you have like heart palpitation, then you're nervous. And actually this podcast has been sponsored by HubSpot for like the past 3 years. HubSpot hosts Inbound, which is a massive conference in Boston. I think this year, 112,000 people total. It was 12,000 in Boston and 100,000, I think, plus or minus, for streaming all the events live. So it's a big conference. It's like, it's like rivaling like a South by or like a Dreamforce that SFDC puts on. Anyways, so because they sponsor the podcast, they asked me to speak. And I've spoken now for 3 years, and now it's not even an issue. The first year, keep in mind, I don't speak a lot 3 years ago. I didn't like really have like a speaking tour. It's not my thing. And they asked me to go speak at Inbound. And it's like one of the first times I've ever spoken on stage. And it's at that level of confidence. Oh my God, dude, I was like, not okay. I was stressed AF, like heart palpitations. Like I felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. Like I'm sure there was a sweat imprint on that chair when I got up.
Did you also start to negotiate of like, how do I get out of this? Can I say I'm sick? Can I say like, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, okay, so how do I get COVID? Everyone seems to be cool with like you bailing on shit because of COVID. So how do I get COVID? And I did it, and it went well. And that sort of like kicked off me being quasi comfortable with speaking on stage. Probably the next 3 or 4 times I did it, it was still very stressful. But of course, like when you go on stage in front of an audience like that, then all the smaller audiences kind of seem like nothing. And then you build up your reps. And now 3 years later, I actually enjoy it.
God, Scott, there's a great TED talk about rejection therapy. Have you seen this?
No.
This guy was like he got rejected, and he stayed in bed for like a month because he got rejected from like funding because of his company.
Yeah.
And he's like, I have to get good at rejection. So he spent either 3 months or 6 months going around doing all of the things where like someone's more than likely going to say no to you. So we like asked the flight attendant, like, can I give the overview for the flight thing? Went and knocked on a door for the Super Bowl. Like, can I come to your Super Bowl party? Just so he would get used to hearing the word no.
Sure.
Exactly. And like, how do you ever get good at dealing with your fear? You have to do exactly like
reps.
How do you gain more muscle? You need to lift weights. Like everybody just thinks once I'm confident, then I'll do it. The only way you'll ever get confident is by doing. It doesn't like it's a feedback loop. And then if you don't do it, guess what? Fear, doubt, fear, doubt, fear, doubt. It's like action, confidence, action, confidence. And so people know this, they know it theoretically, but when it comes time to like go out to dinner by yourself, go to a movie by yourself, well, everybody's going to wonder like, why I don't have any friends, and like, look at me. It's like, that's not true. You have to figure out how to reframe the story. And the only way you're going to do that is if you go sit through the movie and then go do it again and then go do it again.
I love that. That's such good advice. I actually, you know what, I'll so funny because I was never part of this community, but I've heard this is how the community of pickup artists, I've heard this is how they operate. So they will go up to so many women and be rejected so many times that, first of all, I guess they get better at picking up women. I don't know. But then also they're just like immune to it. So then they can say the most
friend like this.
They say the most ridiculous shit and it doesn't faze them because they've been told no probably 200, 300 times.
I have a friend that literally will be in mid-conversation, like sitting outside of Pura Vida, and I'll be like, hold on. Like literally this will happen 2 to 3 times over a court. I'm like, okay, this is.
Or just go up to a.
Oh yeah, I've never seen anything like it. And he's 5'9", and it's not like he's like every single woman is going to say yes to him. He's like, women treated me poorly for so long, and I just taking matters into my own hands. I'll go up to them. I'll tell them, listen, you're beautiful. Yeah. I don't know if you're seeing somebody or whatever, but I would love to take you to dinner. Worst case scenario, they're flattered. They are literally like, oh my God, you made my day. And if they are in a relationship or not, they just say like, thank you so much. I'm like, I'm not interested. Or they lie to him and just say, I have a boyfriend. You know, like that's it. It goes on about his day.
Maybe you don't do it with women, but that practice of rejection therapy, it's so smart. And you can overcome literally any fear you have if you just do it enough. That's why whether or not it's stepping on stage, it's talking to women, it's pitching your company and getting rejections from. I mean, if you've not built anything, you've not raised yet, I don't know how many people you reach out to before you raise, but like you can jump on hundreds of calls with VCs and be told no. I mean, you can sort of probably, if you're a little bit more strategic about who you reach out to, you're going to improve your chances of success. But still, it's going to be an exercise in either being ghosted or hearing no repeatedly.
Yeah, let me give you another piece of exercise or advice that might help your audience. People forget that the micro risks prepare you for the big risk. So when I was going to go on back on my feet, right? Like I was like, this is what I'm going to do for my job. And people were like, are you nuts? Like, you're going to run with these guys out of homeless shelters and you're somehow going to make money off of this? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to build a nonprofit, blah, blah. Yeah. And it felt so scary to everybody else around me. But when I stopped and reflected, I was like, I moved away to a college I didn't know anybody, with a roommate. And then I moved to DC and interned for my senator and moved in with 3 people I'd never met before and went to a city I'd never been to, sold my car, learned the subway system, like all of these things over and over again. You realize I've been taking risks my entire life on micro levels, but things worked out okay. So it didn't feel that scary. That's why it's so important on a daily basis to take these little risks, because you will be prepared when your window comes or your opportunity comes and you won't be so terrified.
I love it. That's great advice. Okay. Where should people connect with you? Where do you want to send people? Socials, all that. I mean, like
On the volleyball court?
on the volleyball court. Yeah. It's so funny because like everybody who I bring on, they're like writing a book or like they started a podcast. But like, I mean, like right now, I love the season you're in. I think it's amazing. I think this is first of all, just your personality is fabulous. And this is like totally aligned with your personality. And I think that this is what more people should aspire to be, just the way that, again, doesn't mean you're going to have $100 million exit, but if you can find some peace in your life and you just remove yourself from the treadmill for a second and you figure out what really lights you up and really, I guess, I don't know, gives you joy and happiness. And I thought about this a lot, like go back to the things that lit you up when you were a kid. Like we don't do anything fun anymore. It's also serious. Like I think this is a beautiful way to live life. And I think you're a very good role model for that reason. So, I mean, there's nothing that you need to sell or promote or send people to, but if people just want to like chat with you, connect with you, where do they go?
One, I think the quality of your life is an inside game. Again, people look at people and they're like, oh, one side. I'm like, their inside game, their heart, their head, their gut could be a complete mess because they're never satisfied, never enough. Everything has to be more and more and more. And I was really mindful I'm like, I don't want to end up like that person where like I'm doing all these things and continuing to chase my tail for what? So thanks for that. And one, I'm definitely active on Instagram, and I public speak a lot. So, you know, people need to book a speaker. I definitely really enjoy that stuff. And I think Instagram's just the best way. Like I have a LinkedIn and whatever, but there's just too many mediums. Like if you want a response from me, or best way to reach out to me or connect with me is through that platform.
And that's the thing too, like, listen, we could do a whole podcast on social and whether or not it's healthy or whatnot. But I mean, at the end of the day, like you don't have to be everywhere if you're not using it for business.
Well, then you're just on your phone the whole time. Like,
Exactly.
so
You're not living life.
You're not living life.
Yeah.
And like, that's like the miss thing where I'm like, I just, again, like people working on certain things. And I know if you're in that place, but why would I spend my time in front of a computer or on my phone if I don't need to?
You have such a healthy view on life. I'm so happy. I'm so happy you came on because I have so many people that come on. And not saying they have unhealthy views, but they haven't moved on from like the build phase of their life. They built one thing, they're on to the next thing, they're on to the next thing. The next thing could be investing. The next thing could be writing a book. The next thing there's always like a thing.
And there's a difference between complacency and contentment. And I'm trying to live in contentment where I'm like, I love like, and I actually wanted to do this podcast because it was in person. Like, I'm so tired of like Zoom podcasts and like whatever. I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely want to go do that one. But I just think like when you think about your life and the moments of your life, you never remember the days where it's like, oh, I was on my computer and my phone all day. And listen, I know that that's a requirement. If you're really in your building phase for your company, I get that. But at some point, do you know the story? You have to know the story of like the fisherman and the investment, the fable there. This guy in Mexico, he's going out. It's like, none of the story. Yes. So like, I'll be really brief. But the guy, like this guy's fishing. This guy's fishing on his tiny little boat. Goes out, comes back with like 10 fish. This investment banker's down there, on vacation, sees this guy. Oh my God, you caught 10 fish in 2 hours. Like, have you ever, like, we could get you a bigger boat and you could catch all of this and I could get you funding. And he's like, well, then what? He's like, well, then I could get you employees and we could get all of these things and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I don't have time to do that because I'm fishing here. And then later I'm going to meet to take a siesta and then taking my wife to town and then coming back and doing something with my kids and blah, blah, blah. And the investment banker walks him through this huge
He
process.
keeps saying like, he's like, okay, so we get employees and then we could franchise out and then we could like go raise money and then it could become like a huge business and you could sell it for hundreds of millions of dollars. And then the fisherman's like, and then what? He's like, well, then you could go on the beach and you could
Be on the beach and then go for a siesta.
Yeah.
It's like, so I could do the exact same thing. And again, the lesson is like, we all try to, and what I just said earlier about like, oh, I play volleyball, all these things I could have been doing beforehand. And don't get me wrong, I loved building Solidcore and I love that so many people's lives are impacted in a way that like because of this company, and I loved it. But it really makes you stop and think about why you're driving toward this thing and what you're doing and what's the end game and how is your life going to look differently than it does now, and is it worth it? And that's the work that Scott I do now. When anybody asks me to do something, I'm like, is it worth it? Like, is that worth me flying? Like I just got asked to go fly to LA. It's like a lot of big wigs are at this conference. And I was like, do I really want to do that? And we had some IVF stuff come up and I'm like, this is more important. I'm not like, I'm going to rub shoulders with Kevin Hart and a few other people. I'm like, for what? That's not my season right now. And I have to stay true to like these things that are important to me, that I said are important to me. And like, thank you for the opportunity I'm going to pass. Where I think old Anne or a lot of people have been like, I'm going because who knows what it could bring, but that's not my season.
Amazing. Last question I like to ask everybody. You've had a great life with lots of different seasons to it. If you were going to go back and tell your 20-year-old self one thing, what would that be?
Trust yourself. Like I do think I trusted myself, but I won't even tell my 20-year-old self that. I'll tell the 20-year-olds who are listening to this. Like every single moment in my life, most people around me have been like, that's not going to work. That doesn't make sense. You can't do that. And I always knew the life that I wanted for myself. I knew the partner that I wanted. And I didn't really care if anybody else thought that it was possible. So like, if you're that person right now, like you just need to continue to trust yourself and try to block out some of the noise.